All right, hello everybody. This is Jake Wynn, and I am here with my good friends Justin and Molly. How are you both doing today?
I am so excited to be talking about what we're talking about today. So I'm in a very good mood. Justin, how are you
Guys, I
doing
want you
today?
to. I just want to set the stage for you. What we are talking about today, has been expertly written for Jake Wynn to discuss, because I don't want to say he's a hipster when it comes to James Garfield, but I remember him giving a talk on James Garfield over a decade ago about this topic. So I'm kind of excited. Jake's a hipster. He is more than qualified to talk about this. And this show for Netflix got into Jake's algorithm and was like, you know what we need to do? We need to make a show for Jake about James Garfield and him and his life and legacy and etc. So I'm excited.
Jake
All
got on
right.
the floor of President Garfield.
I'm going to add history hipster to my CV.
Yes, history
Thank you, Justin.
hipster, just specifically for James Garfield though, no one else. So just James Garfield dash hipster, history hipster.
All right. I will do that. That sounds great. All right. So, what are we talking about today? We're going to be talking about the Netflix limited series Death by Lightning. And what we're going to do for you all today is just talk about what we saw in the show. Did we enjoy it? Talk about some of the history. We'll dig a little bit into what we thought about the show. Before we get started, this is the Public History Podcast. So thank you all for tuning in with us wherever you are listening to fine podcasts. If you are enjoying Public History with Justin, Jake, and Molly, our new rebranded podcast, make sure you go ahead and rate us wherever you're listening. Review the podcast. That helps more people find it as well. And make sure, if you haven't already, that you go ahead and subscribe to the pod. All right, so just do a little bit of a synopsis here of what we're talking about. And I will say, just from the start, spoilers ahead. Uh, would recommend going out and watching the show. However, what are we now? 100 and nearly 150 years after these events transpired. So y'all, if you spoilers don't really count in this situation. Um, but Death by Lightning tells the story of the 20th president of the United States, James Garfield, and it tells the story of his assassin, a gentleman named Charles Guiteau. And in this series, we see the two stories of these men as they are intertwined in the events in the years leading up to to James Garfield's assassination and death. And that is what we're going to be talking about today. So I wanted to start with you guys. Just, what did you think about the show? Did you enjoy it just as a show? And then we can get into some more of the history side of things as well.
Well, I would say that as I was watching the show, I kept being reminded of how many great people they got to play in this show, right? Like, it's almost, I'm not saying it's a who's who's of like period drama or like historical drama or executive branch drama, right? But like, I, one, Tom Wambsgans, I'm sorry, sorry, it's Matthew McFadden, right? Is his actual name, but to me, he's Tom Wambsgans. Just plays, one, him being in there made it just that much better. And then two, I thought, I made the note in my notes here is like, is Bradley Whitford just always in the West Wing, just through different periods of time? Like, whatever perpetual drama you make about the West Wing, Bradley Whitford will be in it at some point, correct? Um,
I literally wrote, Josh Lyman's here.
exactly.
So it's
And
yes.
I just thought it was great. I thought it was great. I thought the period, like, it felt like what is this, the late 1870s, 80s?
Yep.
I thought they did a really good job making it a period, but also not feeling super dated when they made it. I don't know. I was surprised on the budget that Netflix gave to this, and I think it came across pretty well. That's my series review. But as for the history, I was blown away by how I felt watching it. It felt like they did a good job. I don't know about you, Molly, but that was my initial takeaway.
Yeah, I will say two thumbs up. I loved it. I think the way it started was fantastic. It just drew you in like right away, especially when they were like, "This is a story about two men." What was it like? History
Yes.
forgot. one was the 20th president, one was the man who shot him. And I was like, hey, Hamilton, like, what is happening right now?
Yeah,
Because it
it was so
really,
good.
and then when they pull out the brain and they were like, who the F is Charles Guiteau? I literally wrote, yeah, who the F is
Yes,
that?
I think I did the same thing. I loved it because I knew what the show was about, and I was like, why are we starting in the 1960s at the Army Medical Museum? Like, what is
Yeah.
going on here? I thought it was gonna be something with Garfield, and then it was, oh, okay, that's how we're gonna start this thing. And gosh, that was
Yeah.
fantastic.
My favorite part of that opening is, I love that. I love the text. I love who the F is Charles Guiteau, the brain rolling across the floor, the rock music that starts things off where I'm like, wait, what is happening right now? But I was immediately drawn, I'll say, former museum professional. I was immediately like, well, let me tell you, that's definitely not what the Army Medical Museum looks like. This like vast warehouse, like it's Indiana Jones. They just pulled the box with Guiteau's brain out of this vast vault. It's not like that. Museum collections aren't like that. But it was such a good opening. Yeah, I completely agree, Molly. That was fantastic.
And the cast is like everyone is so good, and you might think of him one way, but I think of him as Mr. Darcy from the Pride and Prejudice remake with Keira Knightley. So I love him so much. I love Michael Shannon. I love, 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 love Nick Offerman. Everyone was so good. My favorite character, and now I can't remember the actress's name, Crete,
Hmm.
Garfield's wife, Lucretia. I am obsessed with her. I was like, can the women just do everything, or where are we at with that? So my question for you is like, okay, so I loved it. Again, acting was fantastic, music was fantastic. I thought the pacing was really great. I never was like, oh, I'm super bored with this. I have so many questions about like the actual history and if it is if it happened like they say it did,
Hmm.
because it almost was like too perfect in how it started out with like two semi ambitious people, one a lunatic, one seems to be a saint. They had these like parallel courses, and I just wrote like down like this cannot end well, and it obviously does not. So like, how
Yes.
accurate was the whole thing?
Yeah, so I have minor quibbles about things, but generally I love this show. I thought they did a very good job. I thought the acting was really good. It shows there was some money spent on this. The production quality is really great. But yeah, they did a really good job. So part of that is the source material they're using. It's one of my favorite books of all time. Really, I'm not the hipster, the history hipster here. The real history hipster is Candice Millard, who is a wonderful author, and she wrote a book called Destiny of the Republic. And that is the source material for this series. The writers for the series use that as the example. So that story does intertwine the stories of Garfield and of Charles Guiteau, and really tells their story in incredible detail, which was great source material to write this. But there are some real similarities between the two of them, and it really is a tale of their time period in the 1870s and 1880s. So much is changing in America. It's the aftermath of the American Civil War, the politics of the era just after Reconstruction ends in the 1870s. That's what this is all about. The Republican Party has been in power since Lincoln, since the Civil War. They're corrupt. They're bloated. That's represented by Roscoe Conkling and the stalwart brand of the Republican Party. And James Garfield comes in as the reformer. And then you have Guiteau, and Charles Guiteau is this, um, you know, kind of this figure in American history that represents this swath of people who are, in some cases, suffering from very likely mental illness, but people who are struggling to find a place in this rapidly changing, industrializing, evolving, socially full of social upheaval world in the late 19th century. And Guiteau stands in for that. He's never at home anywhere. He's kind of like this like dark Forrest Gump figure traveling through various parts of America. And I know we get into I think the most cringy parts of this show, where we get to see the free love community of Oneida, New York, where I was just like, I knew about Oneida. I knew about this free love community. I don't think I ever needed to see it quite like
In
that. It was like Game of Thrones meets 1870s burnt over district of New
in
York. It was
perfect timing,
intense.
the one episode that I decided to start with my wife in the room, who did not watch the previous 2 episodes, was that one. So that was a fun, like, let me pause it.
Shout out episode 3.
If you're watching episode 3, just first 10 minutes, maybe just know the room. Because that was a fun conversation to have. And then she's like, well, what is that? I was like, well, it's a free community. She's like, well, how does this play in the show? And I'm like, know what? I'm just going to get off this and I'll just say, we'll just watch it from the beginning at some other time and you'll understand. But it was a very awkward conversation. It was great. Thank you to the writers of the show. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's that one got me. I was just like, oh man, like, yeah, I don't know if I needed to see all of that, but nevertheless, it shows Guiteau is not being at home anywhere and just being kind of an odd dude. And that is the real story of this guy, as he is wandering across America, being kind of a con man, kind of this he's got this tremendous sense of self-importance and that he is the chosen one that never fits in anywhere. Yeah, that's the very real story of him. I think overall the show does a pretty good job of showing the times that they're living in, what's going on. They do gloss over a lot of politics very quickly. They don't get bogged down in the weeds, but it does leave a lot of unanswered questions about, like, I think they keep talking about who the Democratic candidate in the 1880 election is. It's Winfield Scott Hancock, but like they barely mention that he's a Democrat. They don't talk about anything of what's going on in that election. But it also doesn't really matter in the context of this story because they're really telling the story of these two men. And they're not talking about necessarily the politics of what this actually was all about.
Yeah. In a way, that whole part that you just mentioned about Guiteau kind of just being awash, like he's totally like driftless and he's trying to like make a name for himself. A lot of it, I don't know if we can get to this like at the end, but just reminded me of like some of the current times we're living in too. A lot of it did. Even going back to when Garfield gets on the scene at the convention and this kind of guy no one expected gets up and makes this great convention speech and everyone's like, this is the reformer we need. I was like, hey, these are some parallels.
Yeah, it had some Barack Obama vibes.
A little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I was like, this is too similar to some things.
Well, and I think that episode also is interesting to me because it gets at to, I don't think modern people know how previous primaries, I'm going to use that, but elections or conventions worked, right? Today, by the time you get to the convention, usually it's a wrapped. People have known who the nominee was for at least a month or two, depending on the polls and how everything's going. So it was nice to see that displayed on screen. I've always read about, how these old conventions are these famous orators getting up and then there's back and forth and shifting priorities and factions being formed and everything. And I thought they did a really good job showing the fluidity of that, more so than I've ever seen too. And then, shout out to that one random guy from Pennsylvania who decides to nominate Garfield because he's just like, yeah, you're the man for the job. I was like, well, okay.
Yeah, so there's some great scenes of the politicking around the control of the New York Customs House in the New York State Senate, which I was just like, this is incredible. This time period where it's like the Customs House, where I think they mentioned in the show, it's like 3/4 of the goods imported into the United States come through the port of New York, and this like Senator Roscoe Conkling's like control of the New York Customs House is tied up in his control of the New York Senate, the state Senate. It's just like, this is fascinating. Like the local politics of it all, like antique things that don't matter as much anymore in terms of like, yeah, just how much government has evolved since these days. In part because of the events that transpire here. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But I'm curious, what other questions did you guys have that kind of came out of this, or other comments, thoughts?
Oh gosh, so many. I mean, I literally have so many questions. Okay, I think my overall question is, was Garfield this much of a saint? So even like going into the convention, Sherman's little brother is like, um, I want you to be the guy to says the speech for me. And he's like, okay. And he's like, oh, I'll go. And but he also, I feel like he was ambitious at that point. And I feel like Creed knew it, his wife, my queen, and she was like, don't go. He's like, don't worry, I'll be back. But for the rest, I think that was the only part where I was like, oh, this man is a little ambitious. And then he does give up and get the speech, but the whole other time he's like almost too good. He's like
Mm.
too good of a guy. And was he really like that in real life? Or did he have some skeletons in the closet?
Yeah, not so much skeletons in the closet. This is a pretty accurate portrayal of
Mm.
him. Yeah, so the ambition is something that does that is probably his biggest vice. Is really how ambitious he is. You see it right from his start in politics during really the start in national politics during the time of the Civil War. So he's an officer. He serves during the Civil War with Ohio units. Um, he's going to leave the army and go into Congress during the course of the war, and he is going to be a fiery supporter of abolition, of emancipation, and he gives some spellbinding speeches in the House of Representatives during the Civil War years in support of ending slavery. And he is a pretty unabashed, especially for his time period, for his era. He has some very progressive views when it comes to race. Somebody that very strongly believes in the rights of black men who had served in the United States Army during the course of the Civil War. We see that in the show where uh, Garfield runs this front porch campaign from his home.
Had that ever been done before? He's like,
No,
don't, I'm going to campaign from here. And I was like, okay.
so this is an era where there is some drastic change going over and coming over American politics. So the idea going back 20 years, go back to Lincoln, they didn't campaign. There was not a campaign as we know it today. The candidates, they may give some speeches, but they're not really present in the campaign itself. Not nothing like today and shaking hands and traveling across the country. Um, but in Garfield's time, it's beginning to change. That ambition, being ambitious, is starting to change. It's starting to be okay, socially acceptable for people to openly campaign. But yeah, this is the first of its kind, and really only of its kind. Of him on the front porch of his house in Mentor, Ohio, where the world comes to Mentor, and it comes to meet Garfield because he's pretty much a nobody. That's something the show does well, is like people are like, who the heck is James Garfield?
What
He is kind of a minor figure that is elevated in the 1880 Republican convention
Well, they
by
showed
that
that pretty
speech.
well too. That he has these morals of wanting to do a front porch campaign, but then at the end of the day, you, I'm not going to say that I align with Senator Conklin, but you need New York, right? Like you need that big city, that standard establishment kind of partiness. And I guess my question was, is Chester A. Arthur one that much of a drunk, or and two? I mean, I can see appointing Chester A. Arthur. Hey, that's the connection. You see that today with VP picks, right? Of like, we're going to pick the more moderate, or we're going to pick the more to align with the left, right? That was my big question. Yes, if he does his whole front porch campaign, at the end of the day, he still needs that connection with New York, or he still needs that connection with the center of power, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It's coalition politics. You know, you need to have the big tent to achieve victory. And in this case, yeah, New York's where all the money is, and in part because of the corrupt system that had been built up during the Civil War era Reconstruction with the Customs House in New York. And what you have in New York is like this rival. You know, you have the other side of it too. You have Tammany Hall on the Democratic side, so you have these rival political houses that are like it's like the you know the two political families of New York. They're like the mafia that control the
Well, and
politics there.
that's what surprised me about it, because I always associated New York politics at the time of the Democratic Party. Maybe that's just maybe because of I don't know why. I don't know why I associate that. Maybe Tammany Hall, or maybe it's the movie Lincoln. I think of the senator from New York as the guy who's anti-abolition, anti-lot. And I guess always assumed. I know that that's where the New York City riots are going on during the Civil War. I know that they don't. I don't know if do they vote for Lincoln. I don't even know if New York goes for Lincoln. Right. So it's like this weird. I never thought of New York as a Republican state at that time, and that also could be modern day stuff too, clouding my judgment. I don't know. But I never knew. I guess so. This is rivaling Tammany Hall, is what you're saying.
Yeah, so think of it like so Tammany Hall, Democratic Party machine in New York controls City Hall, and at times it controls parts of state government in Albany as well. But the Republicans control national politics, and national politics, the president's going to be the one who's going to appoint the power for the customs house. So all of those import taxes that are being collected, they're appointing the inspectors, giving out those patronage jobs to those people who are going to be responsible for collecting those tariffs as goods are being transported into the United States. So it is a very powerful, very lucrative spot that is in the control of the federal government, as opposed to Tammany Hall being able to support having the control of more of City Hall, and in parts of state government at times, as it goes back and forth and ebbs and flows, state government in New York. So yeah, so I mean that's the I would say the big difference. Tammany Hall is still, they're the ones that are going to have control the longest. Their reign is going to go on longer through the Gilded Age, in the late 19th century. But it's the stalwarts, the conquering part of the Republican Party, and that patronage scheme that they are running through the federal government. This is where we see that end. In the time of Garfield, and then ultimately in Chester Arthur, where you see civil service reform that's going to end the patronage scheme, and that style of government where one government comes in, an administration comes in, and everybody is swept out, and a whole new team comes in.
So one of my favorite arcs of the entire thing was, so Garfield gets the nomination, and then they say we got to bring New York with the dollar bills, and so they get Chester A. Arthur, and he even softens immediately, almost, because he's just kind of this big blustering bully, and he's Conklin's kind of heavy, and he beats up people basically, and then he's like, well, he asked me to be vice president, and he kind of gets sweet. We see a little bit of a sweetness to him. Nick Offerman is fantastic, and then through the course of it, he kind of becomes a more moral person by the end. And I just was like, oh, I really like this arc, and I didn't know how accurate that was. Was Chester A. Arthur such a drunk buffoon when he came in, and then towards the end, was he actually a pretty good vice president / president?
Yeah, so he ends up, I mean, it is remarkable, because he has no, according to precedent before, precedent since, up until maybe the last decade, he's the least qualified person for this job. He's just collecting, import taxes in New York. That's, he does have some service with New York units during the American Civil War, but yeah, he's just kind of this New York bully, operating within Republican politics in New York. But he does, as the show demonstrates, I think that you described that softening well. He is now in the proximity of great power. He respects the offices for the most part. And he also, with the downfall of Roscoe Conkling and this system, he's freed from that system. And so he is going to carry forth and enact some of the getting rid of that spoils system, that patronage system that Garfield was brought in, is really elected in part as a reform candidate to get rid of that corrupt system. And we haven't talked about Ulysses S. Grant and his administration, and that plays a big part in this, especially the beginning of Death by Lightning, of what Garfield is running against and who he defeats for the nomination in the Republican nomination in 1880. But Garfield is Garfield. Arthur's going to carry that forward. He's going to carry reform efforts forward.
So do we want to talk about let's talk about Guiteau, right? I feel like we've talked a lot about Garfield in New York. Once again, as someone who's seen everything but the last episode, and I look forward to watching it, I thought one of the best things they did, symbolism wise, and I had to look it up because Guiteau actually said it or actually intended. So you meet this guy, you meet that he's always there, right? Like he's always just around and interacting with these folks. Mm-hmm. And then when he finally loses hope or loses his, he's affronted that he's not given credit for playing a role in Garfield being elected president, he goes to the gun shop and he's sitting there buying the gun. And the I think it's like a 2-minute scene of you see him going up and it flashes to him in the Smithsonian and it's like Washington's coat, and then there's like an empty case, and then you flash to him at the gun store and he says, yes, this is museum quality, meaning that he wants that gun to be displayed in the Smithsonian afterwards too. I was like, okay, is that just a literary thing that they're using to tell the story? And no, it's not. Like I guess afterwards he said that was his intent, was he wanted that gun to be museum quality. And I guess I also looked it up too. According to the Wikipedias of the world, the gun's been lost. So unfortunately for him, like his museum quality piece that he wanted in the Smithsonian, no one can find anymore. Which, Jake, you're smiling. I don't know if there's more of a story to that, but it was just an interesting kind of way to frame it. Of here's this guy walking through the Smithsonian, and as public historians, like we are, always peeling it back, I thought it was interesting to see the 1880s level of display, which is here's Washington's coat, like hanging in this thing. That's all we're going to talk to you about. And then also, I don't know, Guiteau's noted ambition of I want this to be in a museum one day is kind of wild to me.
Yeah, that's something too that I say about Guiteau is like he's hyper aware of his place in history, and that's what he keeps striving for. And this is where it gets back to Molly, you mentioned earlier about modern parallels. Mm-hmm. There's a bit of Guiteau that does have that little bit of the 1990s 2000s school shooter about him. And he really ushers in. He's not the first assassin of this era. Obviously, we have John Wilkes Booth does what he does, 15, 16 years earlier. But the era that comes after Garfield's assassination is full of these people, all over Europe and in the United States. This ushers in an era of assassination. The Tsar of Russia is going to be one of them. There's going to be princes and counts and leaders all over Europe that are going to be falling to assassins who are either demonstrating an anarchist strain of politics, or in some cases just no strain of politics that make any sense, very much like Guiteau. So he really ushers in this era that's very similar to an era of our own time, where it's just like this violence becomes something that people could put their stamp on. People who are misfits, that don't fit into society, that are on the edges, that can't find a place in this rapidly changing world, are going to attempt to take actions that are going to secure themselves a place in history or make them infamous. And that's really where Guiteau fits into all of this. He kind of knows, through all of his madness and all of his raving and crazy ideas that we see in the show, but and it's very real in the historical record, that he was very much trying to insert himself into history.
Yeah, it was like this like, this is my only path to greatness trajectory, and it just reminded me so much, even just people who are like, no, but how committed he was, that he was like, I'm doing the right thing. Even politically, he's like, I'm uniting the nation. And it was a little scary of just, people in our modern times who feel the same way, who carry out political violence. They're like, I'm doing this for a just cause. And he was so warped by the end. And when they show him with, what was his sister's name? I forget. But
Is
when
it
you Fran,
Franny?
Franny, I loved that name. When he's when he's like with Franny, and Franny's husband, is like, get out of here, you're gonna steal our money again. And he's chopping the wood, and he's so like maniacal. I think it was like almost juxtaposed with Garfield speaking. I want to say he was giving a speech. That was really awesome. And then he just looks up, and Franny's like terrified of him. I'm like, oh yeah, he's like you said, it's that like, ooh.
Yeah,
For
yeah.
me,
People were disturbed by him.
yeah.
Um,
His beard going all the way up his cheeks, also, like all right up here. It was like they did perfect, like hair, costume, all that kind of stuff. But wait,
yeah.
I have a question about that and
Uh,
the assassinations. Lincoln was assassinated. How did how were presidents so accessible to people? Like, they showed throughout people coming in and being like, "Oh, I would like a job in this administration," or "I would like a job anywhere in the federal government." You have to meet with the president, and people just came in. Like, the level of accessibility was insane.
Yeah, yeah, and unchanged from the era of Lincoln. And this was the idea, and you see it in the show. Garfield's talking about, he's going to be accessible to the public, to his constituents. That's something that he believes very strongly in. And then he sees like, oh, this is why people don't do this, because you get all the crackpots and the crazy people that are like, you know, make me the minister to Peru, like it's just crazy stuff. And but yeah, so after the Lincoln assassination, there's not really much of an effort to create an infrastructure of protecting the president, in part because Lincoln's assassination is seen as an aberration because it is so tied up in the immediate aftermath of Confederate surrender at Appomattox, and the Civil War is drawing to a close. John Wilkes Booth is an avowed white supremacist who is like explicitly like, oh, he is trying to give black people the right to vote. I'm going to kill him for saying that. He says he's quoted as saying that in the days before he ultimately kills Lincoln at Ford's Theater. So there's not really much of a movement to do anything after the Lincoln assassination because it's seen as just being an outlier. And then Garfield is assassinated because there's no or very little protection for him as he's traveling in public. And then the same thing happens about 20 years, well, exactly 20 years later to William McKinley, also in a public setting, who's going to be gunned down as well. And it's at that point in 1901 where it's like, okay, and this is after that wave of 2 decades of assassinations all over Europe as well, and including assassinations in the United States. There's an assassination attempt going back to the uh, United Healthcare CEO that was murdered in New York City. That reminded me very much of an event that happened in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Got to bring Pittsburgh into the story. We always talk about Pittsburgh. Where Henry Clay Frick is one of these big industrialists is shot in his office in this time period as well. He survives his wounds, but then at that point, after all of these assassinations of business leaders, of political leaders, finally after McKinley is assassinated, it's like, okay, we need to do something. And then ultimately, Secret Service is going to begin to become involved. That doesn't help Teddy Roosevelt because he gets shot just a few years later as well. But it was an age of political violence, and it is kind of crazy looking back. It's like, why didn't they do more to stop?
Just give him a bodyguard or two. Just like one. You don't have to even have the whole Secret Service. Just like one guy that, because I mean, spoiler alert, when Guiteau shoots him, sorry, Justin, it's like he kind of just, it was so preventable. Well, a lot of things were preventable, including after he got shot. But he just kind of like walks up to him a little, like he grazes him, and then he kind of walks up to him slowly, and everyone's like stunned, like nobody even stops him. And then who is Bradley Whitford? Is it Blaine? Senator Blaine?
Hmm.
He's like, stop that guy. And it takes like a minute until people are like, oh, and they stop it. It just was crazy how he was so vulnerable.
Yeah, yeah, it's crazy to think of just how accessible presidents were. You could just walk into the White House, just sitting in there in Lafayette Park and being like, "I'm gonna go in and see the president today." That was a thing. You could
That's
do
how
that.
our own little Forrest Gump kept showing up everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. So if talking about the assassination, talking about what happened there, if we want to dive into the medical side of things, this is my area of expertise. I will say they did a very very good job with this. The portrayal. It's a little on the nose at times where it's like, again, sorry, Justin,
It's
you'll
all
get
right.
to see this.
I remember your talk from a decade ago, so that's fresh in my mind. So it's great.
So one of the first doctors on the scene is a black doctor named Charles Purvis, who's one of the handful, about a dozen black surgeons that serve in the U.S. Army during the war, and he's one of the first on the scene. He is able to treat the president, provide in part an initial inspection along with a DC health officer who was also in the train station at the time. And think of train stations at this time. They didn't really show this as much because you don't see much about what's going on in the train station. But it's basically the airport terminal of its day. It's where all sectors of society are coming together. So it's like literally everyone is there. So not only do you have the President of the United States, you have Secretary of State James Blaine, you have Robert Todd Lincoln. He's going to be on the scene for assassination number 2. He's also going to be on the scene for
I was going to
assassination number
say,
3 of
yeah,
James
poor
McKinley,
guy.
or as William McKinley as well. Yeah, he's got a little bit of a curse about him. But there's like all these cabinet secretaries are in the train station at the same time witnessing this. There's doctors there. They did a really good job of showing this. I'd say, going back to what I was gonna say, what was a little bit on the nose is when Dr. Willard Bliss, the surgeon who's going to treat him for the rest of the show, rest of his life, when he shows up on the scene and he's like unwashed hands and he's just going in there, and Charles Purvis is like, "Haven't you heard about the antisepsis research being done in Europe?" And I was just like, it's a little bit on the nose to just announce that. That's not a very realistic piece of conversation, but you gotta get that in there. But nevertheless, it is true that there are proponents of antiseptic surgical techniques in the United States. Dr. Willard Bliss is not one of those proponents. And so, unwashed hands, he's putting the tools in his mouth, he's jamming his finger into the wound, he's letting all the pus out. That's all accurate. That's all what Bliss did. And the one thing that I will say at the end of after Garfield's death, and they're doing the autopsy, and they reveal that the bullet was actually in a different part of Garfield's body than Bliss thought it was, and where he had been probing. So he actually created a whole separate channel through Garfield's body with his bullet probe that was separate from the bullet. The bullet actually hits Garfield's spine and ricochets and goes one way, and Bliss thinks it goes the other way. And the wound actually healed internally. And the channel that Bliss kept probing is how the infection spreads throughout Garfield's body, which ultimately kills him. Um, the thing that I found most like, why did they include this? Because not historically accurate, is where Bliss says, like, I think, what does he say? Something like, I think something has gone terribly wrong, or we may not have done something right.
It says it very like, oh, we did something terrible or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, not accurate. No. Bliss
Okay.
was like, he was
Bad.
very, very defensive and was just like, nope, we did everything we were supposed to do. He writes a defense of the medical care. He was also being assisted by some of the like biggest medical minds in the country at the time. They were not proponents of Joseph Lister's antiseptic surgical techniques. So they're all practicing the Civil War medicine that they administered during the Civil War 15 years earlier. And they stick with those practices and they don't evolve and change, and it ultimately leads to the death of the president.
Was the first doctor who came to the scene was Dr. Purvis, when he makes that comment like, "Oh, haven't you heard of the antiseptic medicine in Europe?" But was he a proponent of that in real life, or do we not know?
So there's a lot of criticism that starts immediately of Bliss and Bliss's actions. I think that one's a little too on the nose for how he would have said that. But there is immediately like don't probe the wound, like don't do that, and that's something that was a criticism right from the very beginning about what they're doing to the president, what they're doing to Garfield, and that the probing is going to cause more damage than it's going to help. They are obsessed with getting the bullet out. In reality, the wound does heal itself a bit. Garfield's, had the medical care been different, Garfield's life would have been very, very miserable. And ultimately, his condition would have proven to be fatal anyway, in part because he was paralyzed from where the bullet impacts his vertebrae down. So he can't feel his feet, he can't feel his legs, he can't move his legs. He would, at best, have been permanently handicapped and basically unable to move. But he also, as infection sets in, he can't swallow. You see that a little bit. So he's 210 pounds when he's shot. By the time of his death, he's like 130 pounds, like wasted away to nothing, as a result of the infection that's coursing through his body.
Well, and I guess the question I have too is the Bliss guy who takes over. So I had to look up. He is a Civil War veteran. He was a surgeon during the Civil War. You would have thought, and I guess to your point about, I don't know if you want to speak more on like battlefield medicine, but I would assume somebody who saw gunshot wounds during the Civil War would understand the ins and outs of what to do and what not to do by the time you get 20 or 30 years down the line. I guess my question is, you have this cadre of surgeons who are on the front line of the Civil War, and I've heard you talk about this, Jacob. Before the war, you have a lot of guys who maybe never saw a gunshot wound ever, and now they're treating mass casualty events almost every day. Well, during battle, during campaign season, a lot of the things they're treating is disease and stuff too. But from the Civil War, do you have like today? There's medical studies and there's things that are kind of created from there. Do you have that cadre of members talking about gunshot wounds after the Civil War and what they learned? Because it sounds like, I mean, nowadays we could say, oh yeah, you wash your hands, you shouldn't probe the wound. I feel like usually I'd be like, oh, okay, I'm going to give them a benefit of the doubt because that's, back then they didn't really have the experience that we do now, and that the body of work over 200 years or 150 years of expertise and different studies and things too. So to sum up my question, I guess he's a veteran of the Civil War. He should be used to treating these types of medicines. In the 20 years from the Civil War, do they not make any sort of rapid advancements, or they just kind of leave the study as it is and continue moving about their day?
I mean, there are major advances after the Civil War, but they're happening in Europe, and that's Joseph Lister. He's doing research into antiseptic surgical techniques, which are valuable in a variety of different settings, including emergency, traumatic medical situations like a gunshot wound. That idea of treating wounds, cleaning hands, instruments, sheets, fabric, anything that's going to come into the contact with the patient, of being treated with this diluted carbolic acid to basically clean off anything that's alive on there. That has caught on in Europe by this time, but is slow to catch on in the United States. The Garfield assassination is going to help to move that forward. But as to your original question about gunshot wounds and American surgeons, Bliss is kind of unique. So Bliss, he is the chief surgeon of Armory Square Hospital in Washington, which is the most important Civil War medical facility in the nation's capital. It's the closest to the city docks. It's where the worst patients are treated. By and large, he is a respected doctor of his time.
Yeah, he should know, right? Like, I feel like he's in a position that he should know.
Yeah. So, and this is kind of the thesis of the talk I give, is so he gets himself into trouble in the years after the Civil War, in part he goes out on a limb. He is the head of the DC medical board, basically, and they're trying to he wants to admit a black surgeon to to that group, and he is ostracized and loses the leadership of that organization as a result of his advocacy for a black surgeon. So that's like he ultimately renounces that view and is brought back into the organization. He also dabbles in some other more like eclectic medicine, so not necessarily like standard practice of the time, more of like alternative medicine kind of techniques. And he's also ostracized for that as well. And so what you see is like he's trying to get himself back into the fold, so he just returns to what he knew from the Civil War and nothing more than that. He becomes very, very conservative. And that's what you see in the medical care that's given to Garfield. He also shuts everyone out. He shuts out the world. There are people writing to him being like, my favorite one is a letter that comes into the White House from Iowa. And it's from a doctor out there who's a Lister proponent. He's like, antiseptic surgery is the way. He's like, wash everything with carbolic acid and God help you. That advice is ignored. So Bliss just retreats into the medical care that he administered all those years earlier. But the issue with that treatment in those hospitals is like he would have 1,000 patients to care for. Here he has one, and he's putting all his focus on that one patient. And to him, that focus is get that bullet out of the president's body.
So would you, or I'm not saying you're making this argument, but if there were 1,000 Garfields as opposed to one, if Garfield is just one of 1,000 and not the only person that he's touching every single day, it sounds like he still would probably have made it. Now, like you said, his life would be radically different, but it's the continuous probing that, I guess, yeah, if you have nothing better to do but continually look for something that is there, you're going to make things worse.
And I'll say in this time period and I've talked about this with a few medical professionals as well, in that time period, with that level of gunshot wound, it would have been fatal at some point. It may not have been a few months later. It may have been a year, 2 years. There's no way all of the medical complications from that would have ultimately taken his life eventually, which is, we see that, Purvis initially gives him a, like, this is a fatal wound.
1 out of 100. And I was like, so you're saying there's a chance. I got so
What's your point?
Is it true that Alexander Graham Bell did come in and try to
get
out? Okay, that was crazy.
Yeah. And
I was like Bell, Alexander Graham Bell. I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah, true story. Yeah, he comes in and the machine malfunctions, and he blames it on the metal. They blame it on the metal bed springs.
Molly does. She was like, it was the metal bed springs. I loved his daughter. And when she called him out for the, like, America first, no Chinese immigrants earlier, I was like,
yeah.
I liked her a lot.
Yeah, which is also just gets that reference. I like that they threw that in because this is a time period of, like, Chinese Exclusion Act is going to come in the years after Garfield as well. So talking about that kind of strain of nativist politics that exists in that time period that Garfield was allergic to, but ultimately in that big tent politics of the time, he's just like, you can't, what did James Blaine say? You couldn't get elected city alderman with that, with agreeing with that position. So.
Yeah, the women, again, I gotta say the women are the voice of reason in this. And when he's like, he is not doing well, Garfield, after he's shot, and Crete comes to him, I guess after she's like better from her Monmouth vacation by the sea. And she like, it was so powerful because he's like, I'm not doing well, babe. And she literally is like, you're not saying that. Like, shut up. You're not saying the word die. I was like, yes, he's not going to die. Like, her power is going to power him through. She was so cool. Was she that cool in your life? Please tell me.
By all accounts, they were very much in love, and she seems pretty great. I think they did a good job of showing that.
Also, we forgot to mention Betty Gilpin, who's also a babe and so good in this. She was one of my favorites. Can we talk about what she does to Charles Guiteau after he shoots him and he gets captured?
From a film perspective, it's there to show and demonstrate that she was going to remove, like, that he was going for this legacy. He was trying to create his legacy by killing her husband, and that she would do everything in her power to make sure that history would forget him. And
She literally is like, Justin, she's like, so you wrote a book? I'm just gonna let you know that no one will ever read it, and I made sure of it. And he's like actually sad about it. He's like, yeah.
Well, no, and you think back to what I was talking about, him wanting a museum piece, right? Like at the end of the day, he wants to be remembered, and if that's what she's saying too, then that's interesting.
yeah, you get you gotta have your manifesto.
Gotta have a manifesto.
And
Like
it was
the
classic manifesto, but that whole thing of legacy and like men leaving a legacy is like obviously woven throughout this, and it is interesting about how that power of that like need to have a legacy drives some of them for very, very good, like Chester A. Arthur. Garfield gets shot and he's like, what am I doing? He like runs back to him and he's like, I'm gonna Crete also gives him a little, she's like, you're gonna further his legacy, and he becomes like a good dude and a reformer. And then the legacy that's driving this nutcase, Charles, makes him kill somebody. So it's so wild how like it really can power you to do some good in this world, and how it shows it really well in this. Literally from the jump.
Well, then it shows the ambitions and the hope, but then jar rolling across the floor with some guy's brain in it, and who the heck is this guy? Negates the entire. But the first thing you realize is all of the work that you see Tom Wambsgans, Charles Guiteau doing throughout the show, is negated by that very first scene, right? Of him saying, "Who is this? Who is?" And even the title of History That Two Men Forget. I just thought it was fascinating. I thought it was a fascinating way to frame this story. Because it's just so well done.
And Lucretia kind of says that at the end when she's reading Charles the Riot Act in prison. She's like, so I also know that I lied to my husband and he's not going to be remembered. And I was like, that's true. I mean, for me, like, I don't remember Garfield. She was like, he's going to be remembered as the president that was shot 3 months after he was inaugurated or whatever it was. And then when they are, after Charles is hung execution style, the medical examiners or whatever take his brain for an autopsy, and then they kind of forget about it. And I was like, perfect.
Yeah, and so there are 2 samples taken of his brain. One goes to the Medical Museum, which is now the National Museum of Health and Medicine. The other goes to the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia. So there's 2 jars full of Guiteau's brains out there in the world.
Because they were trying to find what? Like schizophrenia or?
So think of it as what we see now with CTE and studying brains of people who have committed crimes, who have, committed suicide, so that their brains could be studied, showing that their brains were literally like coming apart and had holes in it. Mm-hmm. There were some conditions in the 19th century where you would have been able to see that. Syphilis is the big one that they were looking for, in part because he had been in Oneida in the free love community. So, you're like, oh, maybe madness is caused by venereal disease. But that's why they would have studied it. They didn't find anything abnormal by just looking at the brain. Of course, their understanding of how the brain worked in those days was much different than our understanding today.
It all comes back to Oneida and the free love company.
Yeah, what a scene. What a scene.
I guess my question for you guys before we wrap up here, as I get ready for the next episode and go to watch it now, I thought that it was interesting too that they flash back to Garfield during the war, right? And I thought that was very powerful that they did not go into great detail about his exploits during the war, but about how that influenced. Like, I think of when Garfield sat down with, what is it, his son, or is it his daughter? Or his daughter. His
daughter.
Right? And talks about, like, that type of, the war was not what you read. And he almost quotes Sherman verbatim, right? I think Sherman said something like, war is just something in moonshine, or basically it's not cracked up to be, right? Not war is hell. That's also attributed to Sherman, but more to that, right? And I thought that was, what struck me in that moment was how many, because Civil War is, 20 years before, You have millions of men serve and women serve during the Civil War. How many of them are having those types of conversations before they really? Like nowadays, we talk about PTSD, and I think veterans health is a very big thing. But I mean, that's got to play into decisions after the Civil War and this whole era of politics, of the trauma of what these men and women went through during the war is just played out in small little moments like that you don't really see that often. And I thought that was a fascinating way just to show, because he's not a nobody in the Civil War. He is a big player who is part of William Rosecrans' staff. Like he's not some unknown guy who fights during the war, goes back home to Ohio and tries to retire. Like he is a very big part of the war. And then, like Jake, you said, he switches the House of Representatives when Grant comes and replaces his boss, which is an interesting kind of, I don't know if that also plays into his, not I'm going to say animosity towards Grant, but hope that Grant is not reelected again. Is at the end of the day, Garfield had a job as a aide de camp to a General William Rosecrans during the war, and Grant is the one who comes in and replaces Rosecrans and basically abolishes him to the outskirts of really everything. So I don't know. I hope, I don't know if there is anything in the next episode. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But I thought that they did that very well. There is not. Okay, yeah. I thought that they did it very well with what you see and those little excerpts of him going back.
So. I totally agree. I thought I missed something actually, and then I was like, maybe not. No, I totally agree. I thought it was really powerful.
All right, so we're gonna have one final thought from each of us about the series. I'm gonna start. My final thought. We didn't talk about this, but Nick Offerman, again playing a president. The last time we saw him as president in a film was the movie Civil War. I just want to throw my theory out there into the world that Nick Offerman playing the president in the movie Civil War is the alternate ending to Parks and Rec, where Ron Swanson becomes president of the United States. That is my final thought.
Wait a minute, that's such a good final thought.
I don't have something to beat that final thought.
I also want to say about Nick Offerman, I think the amount of times that he got drunk and was giggly during this movie made me very happy. Yes, when he does the little, and bringing it back to Parks and Rec, when Ron Swanson gets hammered on snake juice, and he does the little dance too. When he was in the bar doing that, I was like, there it is. There's my boy.
Well, I guess my final thought is that next time you're going and visiting somewhere, visiting a museum, or looking at some sort of story like this, remember that these were people's lives. I guess it gets back into that guy saying, who the heck is Charles Guiteau? In a way, it's sad, not for Guiteau's sake, but for the sake of, like, these types of stories mattered a lot to these people. It took Garfield's life. Guiteau was killed over it, right? His wife is the rest of her life. I don't know if, I didn't look up if she remarries or anything. Their lives were fundamentally changed by this. So while it's funny to watch and look at and laugh at, and I think Netflix did a really good job of towing the line between a drama and a comedy, it's still, I don't know, it makes me sad, right? That you know, at the end of the day, James Garfield is remembered as the guy who was only there for 3 months and not this big reformer or this person who gives this impassioned speech. Like, I looked it up. He was, like, ranked in, like, the 20th or something for best presidents of all time because he shot. And it's like, well, okay, no one... you don't get ranked on promise, I guess. You don't get ranked on what you could have done, if not things outside of your control. So I don't know. I guess I came across, and this was without me even watching the last episode, and I know the last episode. And by no, I mean thank you, Jake, for spoiling the last episode 10 years ago. I just feel sad. Like, I feel sad for James Garfield. I feel sad for his family. I don't feel sad for Guiteau, but I kind of do. If that's weird, like, here's this guy who all he wanted to do was be remembered, and he's not remembered at all. Like, he's not even this. I'm not saying that. I'm not rooting for Charles Guiteau, I guess. It's just sad to me that this is how many stories throughout American history and history in general are like this, that are these tragedies that are stuffed in a box in an archive somewhere that maybe somebody will come across at one point, but probably not, and just kind of sit there until either they're discovered or just sit there collecting dust. So I guess that's my turn to be depressing, Jake. If that works.
I,
I
I can I can turn that positive. I can be not Mr. Sadman. Um, so that's like the Justin. You got to the ethos of like why I do history, is really like, you know, carrying on people's legacies and their stories through the things that they leave behind. Their stories, I believe very strongly that we live on through those stories. It's kind of like you're not truly dead until the last person who remembers you forgets you. So um so I think that that's like the thing I will say to your point, Justin, is like I think very strongly that like that's why we do this. That's why we talk about these stories. We're trying to kind of bringing keeping people's stories alive,
Yeah, and I guess
good, bad, or
right. Well,
otherwise.
I guess to your point, like this show, if anything, the American public now walks away thinking, that James Garfield had some promise, and he was this reformer that was cut down early and everything. And whether it's 150 years later, at least he's getting that due, at least to the American people.
Yep.
So.
And let's learn more about Lucretia Garfield.
That too.
Yeah. All right, all. Well, thank you so much for tuning in with us, and thank you to my wonderful co-hosts, Justin and Molly. Hope you all enjoyed this episode, and if you did, make sure that wherever you're listening, if you're listening over on YouTube, hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribing to the podcast, rate, review as well. We're going to be doing more like this, so it's not just going to be storytelling. We're also going to be doing reviews. We'll be talking about other parts of public history as well, as where history kind of comes into contact with, like it did here, with popular culture in a Netflix series. So until next time, this is Jake Wynn. I'm here with Molly and Justin, and we will talk to you all again soon.
Bye.